everybody. Thanks for coming to what I am just right now calling, hands down, the nerdiest panel at CMJ, and if anyone wants to challenge that, you can get me after. Also, this is a total sausage fest, so we are bringing a lot of testosterone to this debate. We didn't plan it this way. Before we get started, and I ask the panelists to introduce themselves, I just want to take a quick straw poll of the audience and see if how many of you feel like you have a good sense of what net neutrality actually is. Raise your hands if you believe you do. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. You know, I think if we had asked that question even a couple of years ago, we would have been met with total blank stares. So you should give yourself a hand if you have any kind of grasp of this issue. You know, even if you do have a sense of why this particular public policy debate, because that's what it is, why it matters, it's a little bit difficult to wrap your minds around why it matters to the music community. So my distinguished panelists, actually I should say brave panelists, are going to take a crack at that today, and hopefully we can all learn something about why this issue matters to musicians and other creative people. But before we really kick it off, I just want to also see if any of you folks want to volunteer a definition of net neutrality. We're just curious. So everybody except for my folks from Future Music Coalition, because they won't be able to answer it anyway.
I can put your sausage fast.
Well, yeah. I mean, you can if you want to counter the overwhelming maleness. But seriously, if anyone wants to take a crack, I mean, you're not going to be graded on this. There won't be a quiz after, but I think the panelists all mentioned that they would like to know what you guys think net neutrality is. Crickets.
Net neutrality is like all data is created equal, and they all have like an equal right to being processed on bandwidth. So like like video doesn't get precedent over any other like data form or something like that. So all data is created equal, I guess.
Yeah, that's certainly there's a lot of the idea of non-discrimination in net neutrality is part of it. I just want to frame it a little bit gently, and then I promise these guys will talk because I don't want to hear myself talk all day. Actually, I do. Now, the internet was basically built on an open platform. The way it was designed was that anybody had access to that platform and could innovate and build on it. It's to some degree why we have a music marketplace where we're seeing more and more licensed and legitimate services that actually do compensate creators and rights holders, because everything from iTunes to YouTube to eMusic to Rhapsody to Justin Bieber. I have to say it because you have to say Justin Bieber once on a panel, that's a new rule. But all of these innovations, like Justin Bieber, to some degree, depend on the open platform. It wouldn't reach you, and you wouldn't be able to see it if somebody hadn't used the internet as a platform to invent it. The reason that we're talking about net neutrality to some degree today is that the people who are providing your internet service would like to charge content providers, that could be musicians, bands, small labels, whoever is trying to provide content or information to the end user. The ISPs want to charge possibly a higher fee for the faster delivery of those sites and services. Now, in the music world, a lot of us are coming from the independent sector. We've seen what commercial radio has been like over the years for indie artists and indie labels, and it's been pretty bad. We're very concerned about the idea that you could have a pay-to-play scenario on the internet, because the wondrous, amazing thing, even despite all of its problems that the modern internet has given us, is the ability for any artist, big or small, to compete with the biggest companies, to make direct contact with their fans. And some of us feel that if we lost that ability, then we would kind of be giving up a very, very important thing that is coming to define the modern music industry. So with that said, I want to introduce the panel. And they're going to introduce themselves because I'm going to totally blow Amaechi's last name with the pronunciation. We'll start with Amaechi, and the panel can introduce themselves, tell you where they're coming from, and briefly why they care about this issue.
My name is Amaechi Uzoigwe. I am a partner in Official FM, which is an internet platform that provides digital tools to audio professionals. I also founded a label called Definitive Jux, an indie label, about 10 years ago. I've been a manager for about 20 years, and involved in various capacities in the music industry. I think net neutrality is a hugely, hugely important and complex issue. It's something that each day, it seems, I learn a new facet or a new nuance to it. I've been talking, as you know, I've been talking about it for a while, but it's not a black and white issue to me. There's so much at stake, and there's so much to be discussed that I think it's incumbent upon anyone who has any interest in the internet, period, to wrap their heads around it, because everyone's going to have a different opinion. But I think what's at the heart of this thing is the freedom and the access to one of the greatest inventions in the history of mankind, and what it can do, the power that this thing holds. And to concentrate that power in the hands of a few people is incredibly dangerous for our society.
My name is James Losey. I work at the New America Foundation's Open Technology Initiative in Washington, D.C. We're a public policy think tank. And we push a lot of policies that promote open networks, open technologies, open software, and open hardware. And when it comes to net neutrality, the debates on net neutrality in the open internet, they begin with the debates on network management and network architecture. How a carrier like Comcast or ISP treats their traffic or ensures a certain level of quality service to their customers. But the implications of that are very far-reaching. The internet is now a private link between two endpoints, such as an individual in an iTunes store or Amazon.com, or Skype connection between someone and their mother. But a common pool resource that's created between the interconnection of tens and thousands of separate autonomous networks. And how one individual carrier treats traffic on their network can have huge implications for innovation, for democracy, free expression, for anyone connected, and anyone such a musician trying to get their voice and their music out online.
I just realized that I didn't tell you who the hell I am and where I came from. I don't know if it matters to you, but I'm Rae-Hunter. I'm from Future of Music Coalition, and for a decade we've been working on a couple of core concerns for musicians and particularly independent artists, and that is access and compensation. On the access side, we're talking about access to audiences. So, we do a lot of work in terrestrial radio, traditional broadcast mediums to ensure that more artists and independent labels have a shot at reaching audiences in their own backyards. The flip side of that is the digital realm, where many of the issues that were less than useful in the old industry, we want to make sure that we don't just graft those on the digital realm. So to a large degree, we're talking about issues like net neutrality and who gets to have access to the actual technology and at which points, and how that actually plays out as we try to build a sustainable 21st century music industry.
My name is Charles Bissell, and I'm a musician. My band is the Wrens. We formed in the 1880s. Having heard the pre-discussion back in the green room or whatever, I can say I'm really no more qualified to sit on this side of the table than me here. Yeah, there you go. But I guess I kind of represent here I represent the person that is making or attempting to make their living in music via the internet. So, although I'm definitely not an expert in some of the more technical and applied ends of this discussion, from practical and in a day-to-day sense, I think about this stuff and stay involved with it for those reasons, because, like someone said, even beyond music or beyond being in a band and selling shirts, tickets, and records or whatever, this is arguably like the primary issue of the day, insofar as that all other issues, the access to the information for anything, political, medical, scientific, are all tied into this. So it's kind of, it's in that sense, I guess I'm here.
Good morning, my name is Paul Molloy. I'm the Political Director and Public Relations Director for the Associated Musicians of Greater New York, Local 802. For those of you that are unfamiliar with the union, we represent about 8,500 professional musicians and teaching artists throughout the Greater New York area, so the 5 boroughs, Long Island, bits of Westchester. And what I do in that capacity is I work with lawmakers at the city, state, federal levels, addressing basically two things: work and wages for our members. We are the largest musicians local, professional musicians local in the country, and so if you go to a Broadway show, you're hearing our members. If you've seen any of the world-class orchestras at Lincoln Center, those are our guys. The Saturday Night Live band, those are our guys. David Letterman's band. You guys are young. I'm sure anybody here that's under the age of 50 grew up with Sesame Street for 41 years. All those tunes, C is for Cookie, Sing, all of those are recorded by our members.
Even the remix?
Even the remix. The Electric Company, the new Electric Company, if any of you have kids or little siblings or nieces or nephews, what is it, little airplane, what's that? Good Lord. I used to know the name of this. It's a cable TV cable TV show for kids. Little Airplane is what it's called. So those are our members. We also represent jazz artists, Blue Note Jazz at Lincoln Center, a lot of indie rockers throughout the metropolitan area. So my responsibility is working with lawmakers to ensure that we have basically work and wage opportunities. A lot of, with the way technology's emerged over the past 20 years, a lot of our work has been shipped overseas or replaced by karaoke machines or tape in many cases, and so that's a big issue. So what I'm going to be doing is representing the positions of our parent union, the American Federation of Musicians, on net neutrality, and talking about things like theft is the biggest issue that we'll be talking about, and ways that government can address it while still maintaining a free and open platform on the internet.
Thank you.
My name is Peter Gordon. I have a company called Thirsty Year. Started many years ago, actually in the late 70s. And for probably the first 20, 25 years, we just went bumbling along and made a living and didn't really understand what was going on, didn't really care to know what was going on because there was plenty to go around. And then in the early part of this decade, I was fortunate to help develop a couple of trade organizations. Richmond Clough now represents the American Association of Independent Music, and the World Independent Network, which is a worldwide organization. And again, all that does, other than looking kind of interesting and odd on your resume, it gets you thinking about what the world is doing and what kind of pressures are putting on this business that we were just kind of happily going along and taking creative people, putting it out there and all kind of making a living. And you began to realize that our business was getting hijacked. We were getting hijacked by third parties, technology companies. And we were asked to self-govern. We were asked to try to convince people that this is wrong, you shouldn't do it. But we lost that battle before we began, because the internet by nature is, if you can find it, it's yours. And that's a very hard behavioral mechanism to take away. So you began to see what's happening to us as the creative process. And the dangerous axiom here is that art without commerce, this is a quote in the Times, art without commerce is a hobby. And if we begin to take away commerce, we all end up being hobbyists here. And it's a bit dramatic, but that's kind of where it's going. We've got two downward pressures here. One, of course, is piracy, which we all know about, and we're not going to really get into here that much, though. It's a parallel course of action. And if you look at piracy as it's starving our industry, because it's really starving our ability to make a living. The final blow to our business, and particularly on the independent side, is net neutrality, which would then choke our industry, because then we have no more access. And that's the only thing. You've heard about the long tail, you talk about all of a sudden there's this great music to access. If you take that away, you starve us, you choke us, are we really going to be here much longer? Forget about the implications of what is the internet, what it means, what it should mean to your life and your rights and this and that. If you look at what we're here about, we represent on this board creative or cultural commerce. And cultural commerce at this point is almost entirely dependent on its commercial sector and getting more so on the digital domain. So if you look at net neutrality beyond taking away your choices, your opportunities, your freedom as starving and choking an industry, then this becomes a fairly dramatic discussion, because that means that all the people that are trying to get involved, trying to bring out the creative side, the creative culture, the creative ambassadors, the worldwide representation of what you're doing, all of a sudden we're going to be in the back seat, in the back of the bus. And I don't think anybody here wants that. Certainly college radio, you won't be able to be accessed on the radio because you'll be at dial-up speeds. So you've got to look at the macro pressures coming down on this industry, and then this becomes less of a wonky issue and more of a survival issue.
Thanks, everybody. I think the way that we're going to do this is I might just toss out a few questions here and there and then take a nap, and this panel will run itself. But basically, I want to bring up the reason that one of the reasons that we're talking about this right now is that in Washington, where James and I do our dirty business, there's tremendous debate around the issue of net neutrality, and the big question is, okay, we understand that the network was built on an open platform, but isn't it just doing just fine? Why do we need rules to preserve that open platform? So I just want to ask anybody on this panel who feels like they can answer it or wants to answer it, why do we need rules to preserve net neutrality if that's the de facto state? Isn't everything just peachy keen? Can't the market sort this stuff out? If we have a problem with commerce and people paying for stuff, won't somebody build a better mousetrap? So anybody want to address that?
Well, I'll start by saying that argument, the market will fix any problems, was used by the financial industry forever. Look what happened. It's not going to fix it's not going to fix the problems by itself. I'm a free enterpriser for sure, but that's definitely not the answer. I think for me, some of the overarching concern. I'm sorry, the first part of the question again?
Can the marketplace, we'll just make it really simple, can the marketplace just figure this out? Why does the government have to do anything? Why does it need rules?
I mean, there has to be rules. The original network neutrality, which I think was established in the 1800s over telegraph and stuff like that, and telecommunications, these have rules. They're not open, they're just not free for the market to figure out how they're going to work and operate. They have rules that govern them. The government regulates these things. And to me, one of the biggest issues here is the classification of the internet as an information source or a telecommunications thing, which have two different sets of governing principles around them. Telephone, telegraph, etc., these are telecommunications things, and they are governed accordingly. And the push is for the internet to be just information, and it doesn't have the regulations, free of so much stuff that's going to protect it. I think that's one of the big issues. And without rules, I mean, everything in society has rules, right? Pretty much anything that.
If you don't mind, I just want to jump in. I think a real easy way to understand this and talking about how the telecommunications industry was traditionally regulated was that, how many of you are musicians? Yeah, all right, you're at band practice, you guys are done, you're sweaty, you're drinking beer, and you're like, you want a pizza because you're hungry. You pick up the phone, you call your favorite local joint, and you get ready to place your order at your favorite local joint. And all of a sudden an operator comes on and says, please hold while we prioritize your calls for Domino's. That doesn't happen on the phone. But without rules in place, as Amaechi said, that could happen on the internet. So if you were a content producer and you wanted to get your stuff in a sort of expedient fashion to your end user, and you have to wait because somebody else has made a big business arrangement and that gets priority, that could damage your ability to maintain those relationships with your end users.
I'd like to add that, if you're asking the market to regulate itself, and there are many markets that do regulate themselves in this country, but we're looking at a unique duopoly here. We've just got the telecoms and the cable industry, and they have, when you have lack of competition, you actually have lack of that competitive edge and the actual need to give better service and the better deal, because you can kind of call it any way you want. So we're fighting against the very basic principles of capitalism into more of the principles of monopoly, and that's what the rub is here. I think if there were thousands of opportunities to get on the internet with thousands of competing companies, first of all, look at our bandwidth and the speed and the cost versus the rest of the world. We're way down there because we just have a few choice few that are there. So the danger is that our holes can be clogged very quickly by just a couple of sources. And that's against the system of capitalism, basically. Free enterprise only works if it's free and competitive, and we don't have that here.
That's right. And I also think really quickly, is the internet a common carrier, you know, or is it not? And is it, if it is a common carrier, then, you know, shouldn't it be a public, isn't it like a public utility, like the telephone or water or something like that? I mean, I think that's one of the important discussions too. Like, what role does this thing play in our lives? Is it just some entertainment or business thing, free enterprise thing, or is it a utility that we all depend on?
But it's a hybrid, because it's privatization to get onto the highway, and the highway is free.
Exactly.
And we haven't dealt with the highway thing. So the pipes are controlling content versus content controlling the pipe.
And who's building these highways is also another part of the discussion. If I'm a Verizon or someone and I'm ready to put tens of billions of dollars into the marketplace, shouldn't I have a say in how that works?
James, you
Or
have
should I not?
I mean, I think
I'm just being devil's advocate.
I like to parse something out here. We have the internet and we have an internet service provider, such as Comcast, Verizon, AT&T. And I think it might be better out to define them as an internet access provider. Comcast doesn't sell you the internet; they don't own the internet. The internet, as I mentioned before, it's created by the interconnection of 25,000 different autonomous networks. We have over 1 billion devices online. I think by 2012, we're going to have 2 billion devices connected to the internet. And to help what Peter's saying, what we have in the wireline internet is an effective duopoly. 95% of Americans have only a choice of 1 or 2 internet service providers to their home. If you're not getting the access that you want, or the access to the content you want at home, you might only have one other company you can turn to, you might not have any. And if we look at some of the markets, such as Britain, where their regulator Ofcom has said, we're going to leave it up to the market, it's easy to see that doesn't work. PlusNet, an ISP in the UK, just has non-neutral networks. They prioritize services like video over other services like peer-to-peer software. Now that might sound like a good option if you want to cut down on something like piracy, but if you look at an individual paying for 20 megabits per second speeds, they will only get 50 kilobits per second on a peer-to-peer protocol or any application categorized as that. That's a dial-up speed. Spotify, the legal music service available in Europe, I don't think it's made it across the pond to us yet, was categorized as a peer-to-peer protocol, which means any customer on PlusNet's network was unable to access that free music source. iTunes download servers are often categorized as a download server by PlusNet, which means someone trying to buy legal music online has a barrier because of how PlusNet treats their networks.
And you might actually, you know, the dangerous thing there is if the ISP wants to become a content provider itself, it has every reason to want to, you know, foreclose competitors' ability to, you know, enter their marketplace. So, yes, Spotify is a legal service, iTunes is a legal service, but if, you know, ISP, you know, X, Y, or Z wants to have their own delivery mechanism of the content, then, you know, they might not even let those guys play on their pipes.
Those are managed networks you're talking about, right?
Well, I mean, we can get into the idea of managed services, but that's going to go quickly down the rabbit hole. And for now, I want to ask Charles the question about rules, because I know rockers hate rules. So, down with the system. So, what do you think? Do you think there need to be rules for the web, or what's your take on that?
Could I take my question and turn it into another question for another panelist?
Just saying, the Sarah
Palin.
You have your answer on your hand.
Yeah, exactly. I got it on a napkin because, like any rule-hating rocker, it came with no pen, and I didn't bring my own napkin.
I'm the man, he's not.
Yeah. It's actually getting back to what you were just talking about. James, when we were backstage, and you were whipping out some of the technical specifics of where the U.S. ranks in I guess bandwidth speed and overall in the world, and how that has changed in 10 years. And it ties into one of the things that I wonder about. I'm pretty sure what the answer is that when they talk about a tiered internet, given that we're running a system that isn't even up to par with like countries in the EU, where are they going to carve out a prioritized? Like if my internet already is slow at home anyway, like how would it actually function? That yeah, I mean, I guess I'm saying, like, how can they possibly say that they're going to like do that without just letting the regular internet wither and die, or dropping everything down to a snail's pace for the unprioritized stuff?
Well, to answer that, without getting too far into the weeds, the essential product that an internet service provider is selling is bandwidth. You get speeds of up to 8 megabits per second, up to 20 megabits per second. You probably don't actually get those speeds. You probably only get about average on half, which is what the FCC has found. But that's based on what the internet service provider is actually providing to a neighborhood or a few blocks. You share your internet connection and the available bandwidth with up to over 50, up to 200, maybe 1,000 different homes. So you might have 1,000 different people sharing a total of 50 megabits per second, maybe 100 megabits per second, depending on the technology. Now, if we start saying an ISP says, wait, customers are using a lot of this bandwidth. They're downloading movies, they're watching things on Hulu, buying a lot of music. How do we start getting more product to sell? There's two things they can do. They can invest in more infrastructure, build some fiber out there, get that close to the home, or they can take that 50 megabits per second that they're selling for internet access and slice it up into more ways and say, well, rather than having this go to internet service for everyone, we're going to provide what was called a managed service or prioritized services and say, well, why don't we say that this pipe is going to go towards Skype or voice services. This pipe is going to go to video. And you start seeing something similar to what we have on cell phones, where rather than paying once for connectivity, where you can use an infinite number of services like you do on a broadband connection, you do like I have with my smartphone. I mean, I pay, probably like many of you do that have an iPhone, an Android device, Palm Pre, anything like that, probably around $100 a month. I pay for voice, I pay for text, and I pay for data. I could functionally do everything I want over my data connection and save myself quite a bit of money. But what carriers would like to do for a broadband connection at home, and what they would like to preserve on mobile networks, is the ability to take their product, slice up in as many different ways as possible, and focus their business model on whatever makes the most money.
They're saying a lot of times when you talk about net neutrality and the need to have open platforms for innovation, they say, well, we're not going to be able to solve the looming bandwidth crisis without being able to prize the rent out of the content provider, so we can invest in those networks. So, I mean, that's like a chicken egg problem that we encounter a lot when we bring these conversations up in Washington. I wanted to ask Paul real quick before we move on to another topic, if you had anything to add in terms of what types of rules do you think would be beneficial if we're talking about an internet, a properly regulated internet?
Well, the AFM's position is simple. Does the market regulate itself? No. You nailed it right on the head. You look at what's happening in banking, and certainly folks cannot be trusted to do the right thing. Oftentimes, anyway. For us, what we would like to see is addressing theft. What we represent. The AFM represents about 90,000 musicians throughout the United States and Canada. And many of them use the internet to sell their music. How many here incidentally use the internet to sell their music? Anybody? Okay, we got a few folks here. Just to put this in real numbers, the International Federation of the Phonographic Industry, they are an organization. They represent the recording industry worldwide. I think they're about 1,400.
Million.
Yeah. In any case, they issued a report about 2 years ago, stating that there are about tens of billions of illegal music files that are traded annually worldwide, and they found a statistic. They came up with a statistic that basically for every legal download, there are 20 illegal downloads. So the model that I came up with, that I'm using just to give you an idea what that means in terms of dollars and cents, CD Baby. My understanding is if you sell on CD Baby a track for 99 cents, they keep 25 cents, the artist gets 74 cents. So suppose for 1,000 tracks sold, that's $740 that's earned. But $14,800 are lost due to theft. You bump that up to, say, 50,000. That's $37,000 earned for legal downloads, but $740,000 are lost due to theft. Now, apply that to say, Tower Records, a brick and mortar building. I mean, That would never fly. Do you imagine for every CD that Tower sells, 20 are shoplifted? What would they do? They would employ, yeah, right, but how would they address that? They would employ some kind of security measures. And so for us, what we would like to see, we would like to see the FCC adopt some principles that can address the theft issue. Musicians have a right, just like any creative person or anybody that sells their goods and services online, to do so without being ripped off. And so we would, and I should state up front that the AFM opposes ISPs having any kind of tiered system. We don't want them to be gatekeepers. That is a dark and dangerous path. I think everybody here agrees on that. So for us, it is a tricky situation because oftentimes our position gets confused. People say, well, no, you want to be able to shut down certain pipelines so you can prevent people from trading, distributing illegal downloads or movies or what have you. It's not that black and white. It's a very nuanced discussion about finding a way to prevent theft. That's really what it comes down to.
If you don't mind if I jump in real quick. I think there's a lot of validity to the idea that currently, if you're selling a CD to a customer, a single CD, if you're doing that from a merge table, that's where you're going to make the most money, just hands down. Particularly if you made that CD yourself with your little shop tools or however people do it. But the idea of putting the toothpaste back in the tube with online distribution, I think that's also kind of a flawed concept because the cat's out of the bag, genie's out of the bottle, whatever you want to call it. And now it kind of behooves anyone to figure out how to solve the issue of monetization, compensation across a whole range of consumer behaviors, right? And if you want to look at how to solve licensing issues and compensation issues, that's the panel down the hall. We can't get into that, but it's important to keep your eye on the prize in terms of the real question is going to be who gets to play in the new regime, because we can all kind of agree that digital distribution is going to play a massive role in whatever form the industry takes, in whatever direction it goes. The question is, who gets to play in that place, at what cost, and whom do they have to ask permission of? And so I think that bringing the net neutrality argument back to that is kind of helpful, because there very well could be technological things that come about that could help curb piracy, and they very well may need to work in concert with things like a voluntary copyright database and stuff that's, again, outside of the realm of this conversation. But the first thing is, for anybody who's an independent content creator, music creator, innovator, anybody that does anything online, you have to have some basic assurances that you're going to be able to access that platform just like everybody else. So I think that, I don't want to put words in any of the panelists' mouth, but for Future Music Coalition, that's always been the essential value proposition. Now, if we can at least agree here on the panel that we want to strike a balance between entrepreneurship and innovation on one hand, and some basic protection of intellectual property on the other, then the question is, how do we strike that balance, and who is in charge of maintaining it? So I would like to throw that out there, because some folks would say the FCC needs to do this in rulemaking. Other people would say the FCC should not play copyright cop. Go do it somewhere else, like in the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, or through statute, or through legislation, or at the FTC, or whatever. I just want to throw it out there and say, can we do it? Can we strike the balance? And if we even can, who's in charge?
Can I jump in on that one? Because it's such an easy question. Look, I think it goes back to if content is king, which is where a lot of this started, as opposed to the pipes are king, why can't we, what good is searching if you can't find content? Let's start with that. There's nothing to search, so therefore you don't need content, so therefore you don't need pipes, so therefore you don't need the internet. So if you look at content as where it all begins, you're looking for stuff, and we are part of content, we're cultural content. Why shouldn't we dictate the terms of how you use our content, and therefore how our content needs to be protected, and how it needs to be protected constitutionally and enforced in order to have the privilege to let our content fly through your pipes? Shouldn't that be our right? Because we have the final copyright ownership of our content, as opposed to being dictated by technology companies that are telling us how our content's going to be used and accessed. I think we have to go back to where the baseline of all this is that nothing exists without us. Therefore, we need to come and say, here are our rules, or don't use our content. As opposed to us learning about these new workarounds, new technology companies that are saving us from an industry that's getting cancerous and not dealing with the basic fundamental issues. This is meant to be a meritocracy, which is what an open access internet is, and it's also meant to be for the exchange of legal content.
Peter, can you define your content, in comparison to everyone else's? Because the other thing about the internet is that there's user-generated content, and I know the word hobbyist gets thrown around a lot, but those distinctions are often blurring. So when you say we want to tell them that they have to kind of play by our rules to use our content, what about people who aren't necessarily affiliated with your team?
Well, I think, first of all, any content originator, if I understand this, really has the right to say either take it, it's yours, I don't really care about it, or if you're within a professional infrastructure, this is what we need in order to sustain our business and sustain our ability to continue to develop, grow, and exploit content. If you're on the professional side, I think you have different concerns. If you're a hobbyist, you're just really thrilled that somebody pinged you and said, I really liked what you're doing.
Aren't we all really thrilled when somebody likes what we're doing? I just want, can I kick it over to Amaechi real quick? Because you guys have actually, you're coming from similar perspectives because you've had business models that were built in this way, but you also understand the need to be able to reach your audiences, and that's always been the problem.
Well, it's beyond that. Amaechi, everybody who is dependent on a family of people that we support. It's not only the artists, it's the people on our staff, it's the publicists, it's the advertising, it's the marketing support. So us as little companies putting out one release, there could be hundreds of people affected by whether we can grow an economy or not. So this is beyond just putting out a record and seeing what's happening. You're talking about a whole creative industry that's being impacted. And I'm just saying, why can't we shift the burden back to, it's our content, these are our rules, why can't we play by our rules versus us being forced to play by their rules?
Yeah, conceptually that makes a lot of sense. It's interesting because you start looking a little bit further and you see, and we don't want to have a debate or anything around like what defines a legitimate release in today's marketplace, because that's just, we would be here all day. But it's interesting because, creators aren't a monolithic group. Musicians aren't a monolithic group. People who work around and support, creators in an infrastructure way aren't a monolithic group. So the only reason I flagged that, and you can feel free to, kick me in the shin after the panel because we were
during.
You've got long legs.
I do.
Seriously. But Amaechi, do you have anything to sort of to illuminate in that regard?
Well, I think I agree with Peter that content is certainly everything, and those of us who are in the business of creating it will certainly say, without us being compensated for what we do or artists or whatever, there's no reason to fucking do it, excuse my language. What's the point of creating anything if you can't guarantee some baseline of compensation or fairness in trade? It's a pointless exercise. But at the same time, and this is, I guess, somewhat analogous, it's maybe a bad analogy. Albert Einstein said, when he was talking about religion and science, that religion without science is blind and science without religion is lame, something like that. Well, content without the pipes is lame. And the pipes without the content is blind. And you know what I mean? It's like we need them both. The content can't go anywhere without the pipes, but it has to be done in a fair way. And to me, that's really the problem. My label, we launched a website, one of the first download sites where you can buy physical and digital product in the same shopping cart about 5 years ago. It was one of the best things we ever did. It really was a huge thing for our business. But given where this could go, what little guys like us could never do that. We depend on a hardcore fan base that likes to buy directly from us. They would rather buy from us than go to iTunes or anywhere else. And without that, it really, really damages our business model. So if people can't access my website because the ISPs have set up some tiered system or whatever, then tons of labels like us are dead. They're dead. I can't feed my kids. My artists can't feed their kids. Da 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 da. So, like Paul said, if for every CD sold in a store, 20 were shoplifted, there would be martial law out here, you know. But nothing in the internet and music. Again, we have to understand music is one piece, and it's a small piece of the larger puzzle. Movies are way bigger and way more at stake and way more lobbying power and way more everything.
You're not kidding.
You know, so in some ways we kind of need to hope that our interests align with the film industry and the video industry, and surf that wave, because there's only so much we can do as music people. And you know, being in DC, I mean, it's whoever has the bigger business is going to get the most attention.
Music is always the canary in the coal mine, it seems, on a lot of these digital issues and rights. Paul?
Yeah, I wanted to echo what both of you talked about, is the human face of this. You're talking about human beings that have families, that have, if they are
Justin Bieber is not human.
or they have staff, you know, that they're responsible to. You know, you give somebody a job and you say, I'm going to take care of you. You can rely on X dollars per week, X benefits per week, and so on and so forth. And if there's a system in place that undermines your ability to run your business, to feed your family, to staff your business, and give your employees dignified living wages and benefits, we're in trouble. You know, and it's interesting, and it gives rise to this discussion. How do we protect what we have? I just want to share with you, I thought this was interesting. This is from an 802 member who was recently advertising a new venture that he had engaged in. He got pretty hot about this. He said, all of us are in something called show business. And in the music business, which is part of show business, actually think it's just music or show. They forget it's a business. It is a business. You have a fiduciary duty to your own butt to make sure you maximize any potential and minimize any exposure. And he said, make sure your brand is protected. Be litigious. Sue anybody. Take their homes, their cars. Don't let anybody cross that line. So the music industry. Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley of KISS are 802 members. So I always thought this was very, very interesting. You know, that he said that the business basically was asleep at the wheel. He didn't have the balls to go and sue every fresh-faced, freckle-faced college kid who downloaded a clip. He said, so now we're left with hundreds of people without jobs, and that's, you know.
Or you've incentivized those freckle-faced college kids to steal because they are just morally, for some reason, opposed to the industry that you've constructed and try to maintain in a death grip.
Or maybe for the first several years, there was no rules or anything around the internet, so kids grew up making music for free. The industry was asleep, but they don't get a. I mean, didn't Steve Jobs go to the majors in the very beginning of iTunes and said, "Hey, I got a little idea I want you guys to be in on," and they gave him the finger. I mean.
And then they gave him the store.
It's like these guys, and that's the other thing. The major labels' interests are not aligned with, say, my interests necessarily. You know, these are multinational corporations who have interests all over the playing field, whether it's music, whether it's film, whether it's this, whether it's that, da-da-da-da-da. So are we going to sit at the table and argue for the same things necessarily as a Sony?
I want to kick the conversation a little bit further down the road because, you know, obviously compensation and access are huge, huge issues. We'll get to questions in just a second. Before we go down there, though, I just want to say that, you know, thieves and people who steal things are obviously, you know, not playing in a legitimate marketplace, and, you know, there has to be some sort of system to encourage people to purchase music so we can support artists and support musicians, but, you know, and labels. But to a degree, again, this is a range of behaviors, and I always try to bring up, and I'm not the genius to solve this, but there's got to be a way for people to monetize along that range of behaviors as much as possible everywhere. And I think once the industry slowly comes to, you know, and catches up, business models catch up to some of this, then we might be able to be, you know, having some different conversations and not just about, oh no, we're getting ripped off, or, you know, the freckle-faced kid, or, you know, the evil big labels or whatever. It would be wonderful if someday we could have a CMJ panel and not talk about those things. But I want to jump ahead in one other part about net neutrality, and I'm going to ask Charles this question, because one thing we haven't talked about is expression. Because art isn't just commerce, art is also expression. And free speech is a really important, value in America, and it protects, and the First Amendment protects everybody's right to speech. What happens if a couple corporations are able to decide arbitrarily what's proper or improper to say over their pipes?
A series of not good things happen.
Done. Moving on.
Thank you. Any follow-up?
No, I mean, what do you think about the the tensions between expression and information exchange?
Well, I mean, everyone here in a room is probably here in CMJ because you're in a band, and I mean, I know we did the hand raising and stuff, so you're in a similar situation to me. And when the discussion kind of goes, and I don't want to go back either. When it kind of goes to issues of piracy and stuff, and illegal file sharing and all that, it's I find myself in a weird, not exactly contradictory position, but my thinking runs somewhere in a very vague sense, and not even talking about the moralities or legalities of illegal info swapping. But that for years, I've been in the same band for 20 years and was a musician for almost 10 years before that. So for years, my access to sell records was dictated by getting someone to like me from a label or whatever, and so that was something that prevented me from actually releasing music. So even when that happened, we still never made money from selling records. Like there's always another, there's a million stories of record company accounting and all that kind of stuff, and we're largely talking the big record labels versus like the small labels that I'm on now. But the for me to work, I don't find myself worrying now so much about losing revenue to file sharing with all due respect, because maybe like you, maybe unlike you having been on labels in the past, I was never making money from selling records anyhow. But now I finally have the access to, if I get an article on Pitchfork, people come to our website and will come to our show, or will buy something from us, or will buy one of our heinously designed and self-printed T-shirts. But and that was never the case before. We never controlled the means that we as our band and as a single musician could sell stuff to, not to you because you're all musicians too, but to each other and the general public at large. And there's with the notion of the thing that scares me about the kind of the notion of the tiered internet or a non-neutral internet is there was the whenever you read about it, or whenever I hear about it, sometimes it's, especially for people that aren't opposed to it or have a vested interest in, go ahead and tier music, is it's kind of presented like, what does a few seconds matter? Like if someone reads about my band and they and I am not on a fast track internet, if it actually goes that way, and they search for my website and can't find or can't upload, or I'm sorry, can't download the site quickly enough, so instead they turn to an Amazon or an iTunes or something that is able to pay for higher speed access online. Like, what's the really big deal? But I think a lot of this is parsed out in seconds, because we all know that, even when you're, I can't tell you the number of times when I Google something and then, you click the first result, and it doesn't quite load, you can go back and click the third one, etc.
So that's commerce, but like, what if that happened to you and then you wanted to write a song called "Fuck You Comcast" and,
right.
and then they didn't like that?
Well, yeah, exactly.
I just like saying "fuck you."
So you've heard our new rock and jam. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, like, what if they didn't allow me to post that online? Or
yeah, I mean, the idea that we're not just talking about your ability to achieve commerce standing with your customers, but like if you were actually going to say something that they didn't happen to like in your art, you know what I mean? Like, how do you feel about that? Is there any?
Well, I mean, that almost good. It's like an easy answer. I mean, just without saying no, I would not like that. I mean,
that's censorship, right? And I mean, it's
it is.
At the end of the day,
is it a worry to any of you?
I think it's a terrifying concept that people could, it's happening, and if I'm, say I'm a political blogger, and I'm writing a screed against so-and-so, it could be Obama, it could be a Republican, whatever, and the company that happens to control that network happens to be affiliated politically, so they don't want me, they don't want anyone speaking poorly about their guy, so they don't let anybody have access.
Well, we have, in 2007, AT&T was streaming a Pearl Jam concert, and Eddie Vedder had some things he wanted to say about George Bush, and AT&T censored that.
That's China.
Yeah, they killed those. There were some song lyrics that, and all of a sudden, just for a few seconds, the audio went away. And it turns out that those were, just for a few beats. It turns out the missing lyrics were criticisms of President Bush, and it's actually it's happened. There's several examples. How many of you have either read the text or heard the speech that Senator Al Franken gave October 5 last year at the Future Music Coalition down at Georgetown University? I think he's one of the most articulate. I think he's one of the most articulate speakers on this topic, and he outlined several examples of this type of censorship. I have a copy of his text, and that was one of the examples. What AT&T did. Verizon did a similar thing for texting from the pro-choice group NARAL. You may be familiar with that. That they refused to allow them to send text messages to its supporters, even though they had signed up to receive them. And Verizon's explanation was that they had the right to block what they called controversial or unsavory messages, like that a woman should have the same control over her reproductive systems that men have over theirs, or Comcast using that deep packet inspection, which for those of you unfamiliar with that, that's a program that it inspects every email, every Facebook post, every tweet, and can kill it in real time. It's really dark stuff, blocking lawful peer-to-peer applications. And he listed several examples happening in the United States right now.
Now, the interesting thing here is that sometimes you'll hear the counter-argument, well, why would we want to give the government control over our speech online? And, well, actually the government is what enforces and protects our First Amendment rights. So they are there to do that. And sometimes that has to be adjudicated in court, and sometimes it goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. But the fact of the matter is the corporations don't have any of those, so if you don't actually have established, First Amendment or free speech principles on this communications platform, and you just say, oh no, the corporations are free to decide what constitutes speech on that platform, then you don't even get those basic First Amendment protections that the government offers.
I think an important way to look at that is, again, the internet is this interconnection of billion devices, 25,000 networks, and Comcast, Verizon, AT&T is just providing access to that. If they're in a position where they're able to choose which service might be better for you as a customer, whether they want to prioritize access to YouTube or Rhapsody over Spotify if it makes it to the States, or over Hulu, they're then in the position to decide who are the winners and losers on the internet and what services are available to you. And it puts applications and content and services on the internet, which right now is freely available to all, it's subject to that, to the corporate and market interests of internet service providers. And that's a huge implication to free speech and free expression. Suddenly it's no longer anyone can say what they feel like they need to say on this open soapbox, but Comcast is able to say, well, we're going to say this voice is more important than yours, or this band is more important than your band, or this label is going to be more interesting to our customers.
I think we found something that we can agree on. Peter, I need to get your consensus on this. Do we agree?
Refresh.
You were taking a nap. Damn it!
No.
I was just interesting that we all can kind of say that free speech is an important component of communication on this platform.
Well, I guess the question, the principle I don't understand is if the Constitution protects free speech, which it does, why wouldn't it apply to the internet? I don't understand where the disconnect.
Well, because if you treat it like private property,
okay, so we get back to, is the internet private property or not? And that's really the crux of the debate here. And who controls that ability? The other thing is, once you get to net neutrality, it begs all of those questions. Once you can tier, once you can parse, once you can throttle down speed, you can also throttle down information and what comes through it. So what you're saying is this is a big issue of who controls what, and that's really what our discussion point should be about.
Yes.
Is it a public service? If it is a public service, then you have to abide by our constitutional rights. And part of the constitutional rights is the protection of copyright.
Yes.
And so this is really one big
That's right.
discussion here. And when we parse it, we confuse ourselves and we allow all this jockeying position. But it should be one big public discussion. And otherwise we get stuck in the mud and capitalism is going to work every time, every
Well, that's why you guys are here, and that's why, you know, trying to amplify the voices of people who don't necessarily represent just the 2 or 3 major content companies is also important when we're talking about these things.
Yeah, I mean, it's too easy to abuse the system right now when you just have a couple of players
I
involved.
mean, look at the Google Verizon thing, which I'm sure everyone has heard of. And,
Do you want to, that was one of my questions that we jumped over. Do you want to try to explain?
Well, you can probably explain it much better than me, but for me, the bottom line is whenever you have 2 giant companies like that getting into bed together and advocating for a certain position, it probably means it's not good. And it's really disappointing because it's Google and we've all idealized them to represent something that's really awesome.
James, you want to take a crack at telling us what was in that damn thing in layman's terms?
Right. So Google was once the biggest internet company. Facebook's overtaken them. Verizon, I believe, is still the biggest internet service provider in the U.S. between wireless and wireline. Got together and, to give a little background, the FCC, who oversees telecommunications regulation in the United States, has been having ongoing discussions over what do we do with the internet? Do we want to have preserve neutral networks? And during this time, they had some closed-door meetings where primarily businesses were able to sit down with the chairman and other staff and say, well, how they thought the internet should be regulated, which is troubling on its own. And then outside that, Google and Verizon sat down and came up with their own proposal. And I think they got a couple phrasings right. I mean, for example, they thought that the internet should allow innovation without permission. However, they made a key distinction, which I'm not sure how many folks on the panel want to get this far into it, but I think it's very important, which is there would be some protections or in generality on wireline networks, such as DSL or cable to your home, but they didn't want to have any of the sorts on wireless networks.
Like your mobile applications, like
It's the future, that's why.
And I think that's an incredibly important distinction to keep in mind. And it was something that Congressman Waxman, what didn't make the mainstream news, but was having some, again, closed-door meetings with organizations and other major players in the market on how should we regulate the internet. Again, wireless was not included. And the key distinction here is internet is moving to the mobile space. Many of us in this room are going to have the internet on our phones. Some of us have the internet on mobile devices like an iPad, a netbook, connecting our laptops to it. And the question is, will that be a fundamentally different, quote, internet access than we see at home? Will that be a space that says, you know what, we're not going to allow you to use Skype because we want you to pay for a separate service? Are we going to have an agreement with Rhapsody or our own Verizon-based internet marketplace and not allow iTunes? Because we want to control that revenue stream and at the same time lock out artists that don't agree to those terms or are included in that market space. And I think that's a fundamental difference and a huge problem in addition to Google and Verizon essentially being 21st century robber barons and trying to control their own markets.
you heard it here first.
But are we going to have a bifurcated internet between the mobile and wireline space? And I think that would be an absolute travesty as the mobile becomes more and more important, more ubiquitous in our lives.
And the amazing thing is people are actually starting to utilize services that do compensate rights holders and musicians on the mobile platform because it's there, it's attractive, it's mobile, and you know they can. You know, Pandora is just kind of like the shot over the bow, and I think we're seeing things like Mog and Rhapsody, and they're not built to scale yet. Where the money from this, I mean, some people would say, yeah, but they don't pay shit, and that's probably true at the moment. But we're moving into this space, so the question again becomes who gets to play and how much do they pay, or do they even get to play? I want to open it up.
Just one thing really quickly. I think what you're saying is maybe one of the most important points here. The elephant in the room is mobile. These guys are, it's when Prince says the web is dead and Wired magazine says the web is dead, people laughed at them, you know, but what they're talking about is mobile is alive, and that's the future, and everything's going to go to mobile. So if you're like, www, whatever, fine, go, you can have unfettered access to that. Yeah. Because we have this. And what does Google have, this new SPDY instead of the www?
They have cars that can drive themselves too.
And everyone's sort of orienting themselves towards the mobile space, all the big boys, and they're going to leave this terrestrial or land, you know, lap or this stuff. Modems, and all the research I've been doing, it's modem. They're always talking about modems and this and that. It's all, you know what I mean? Yeah. And to me, that says mobile is where they're betting their futures on.
And after that, it's the chip in your head.
Yeah. I think let's talk about it. I don't want to argue the web is dead. I think Wired, I believe, said that a number of years ago before. But to redefine what net neutrality is, it means that a internet service provider or carrier cannot discriminate against any application, service, or content. Be that website on the World Wide Web, which happened in 2005, when a ISP in Canada blocked access to its users to a union website to prevent organizing, or blocking access to an application like the inability to use Skype on your handset, or blocking a service, again, such as PlusNet in the UK, limiting the ability for their users to use Spotify. So that's an important distinction. It's beyond the web. It's any content, any application, any service, and the freedom to use that on the device that you choose.
Okay, let's go to the audience. Okay.
Hi, I'm Jolly. I'm a VP with the Internet Society here in New York. And so I've got, a lot of thoughts going on. But first thing is, you're talking about common carriage. Well, we had common carriage in the phone business, which is what allowed the Internet to develop, because people could go down the phone with things. So then the phone companies wanted to get onto an equal footing with the cable companies who had a different model. They were an information service against a communication service, and so everybody got on the same page in '92, and so the phone companies are not, they're all information services now, and so that's once out of the bag is a very difficult thing to put back in, and it's my feeling that the only ultimately net neutrality can only ultimately lead. The only solution is ultimately structural separation of content and the wires that you get it through. I'd like to remind you of Tim Wu, who came up with the term net neutrality, and his arguments that he used to talk about it. And he talked about how in the early days of the film business, everybody was making films for each other, and eventually it got consolidated into this top-down vertical integrated thing. The radio business, everybody was talking to each other, and then it eventually got consolidated into this top-down. And if you don't think it's going to happen to the internet, then you're very naive.
That's right. To some degree, when we're just for the audience's benefit, one of the things that the FCC is trying to, or was looking at doing, with separating the transmission component from the information component. Okay, and so they would regulate the transmission component as a common carriage or a Title II service, which would be like the phone line. So increasingly, the people that are providing you access to the pipe are providing you access to the pipe, and everyone that makes content for the magic pipe gets to do that without being discriminated against. That's the theory, but Washington being what it is, there's a lot of lobby power, there's a lot of money behind that lobby power, and there's a lot of opportunities to stop the clock. And we have these sort of great sort of policy frameworks and ideas that we would like to accomplish. It's not always as clean as that, but I'm glad that you brought that up.
I mean, to touch on the concept that's brought up in the deregulation of service providers, in 2001, Denmark said that the United States was 18 to 24 months ahead of any European nation in terms of broadband access, speeds, and penetration, because we had vibrant competition. In 2002, it's when the FCC started deregulating. They finished up in 2005, when the Bush administration FCC had effectively deregulated the internet. No longer did someone who had the pipes have to open that up for other competitors to also sell a competing service. They were able to bundle their services together. And over the last 9 years, we've gone from around 9,000 ISPs in the United States to a point where 95% of Americans have a choice of one or two. And that's kind of competition to really have an effective duopoly. But the real key thing to remember on the net neutrality debate is that while common carriage is part of this bigger picture, when we focus on net neutrality, it's the question of, can the ISP that you're buying your service from tell you what application, service, and content you can use over the connection, Or is that end freedom left to you?
I want to continue because you're talking about how the content should be controlling stuff, and what we've been seeing is very egregious examples of this now. ESPN3, for example, if you want to watch the sports on that channel, they have a deal where if you're on an ISP, you can only get that if they give it to everybody. They buy it like a cable company does. Do you know what I mean? So,
yeah,
so they're turning the ISPs into like that information service model and imposing it on them. Otherwise, they block it. And we just saw this example last week where Fox blocked, it
was almost
the
reversed.
Giants game to the whole of Philadelphia to bring pressure on Cablevision to do the deals. Comment.
That's right. I mean, without getting into that, it was like, the regulation that the FCC would like to apply to the internet space would prevent ISPs from restricting content to end user. But this was interesting because the content company actually restricted the content to a certain ISP who people were subscribed to. It's on the internet. You can look that up. We have very little time left, so I want to jump ahead to another question. So.
I'm sure everybody can probably hear me. This is really short anyway. But so.
You're just really tall.
Thanks.
Has anyone ever told you that?
Like some girl in the elevator the other day. So my question is going to focus on the role of copyright on the internet and controlling copyright infringement. I want to preface this with I do think that artist compensation is a very important issue. I think we can all agree that artists deserve to be compensated for their work. What bothers me is when people call copyright infringement theft. Copyright infringement is not theft for multiple reasons. One, USB Dowling. Copyright infringement is not theft. That's what they held. Two, theft is when I take something from you and then you don't have it anymore. Copyright infringement, I copy something from you, everyone still has it, just creating more. What copyright infringement is infringement, which is also illegal and still a problem. But I think that the rhetoric of theft is a bit inflammatory, and I think we should step away from that so we can focus on what the real problems are. So, in the context of network neutrality, the way copyright infringement kind of law has developed, because it's infringement, not theft, and it's about content, it's a really vague issue, is that it's really fact-specific about whether or not you've infringed, especially whether or not something's fair use, whether or not something's even copyrighted. So when we come to network neutrality, and people try and use this as a vehicle to control copyright infringement, people talk in terms of rules. But everything up until now has been about flexibility and case by case. So what do we do with that? Like, do you think that network neutrality is an appropriate vehicle to police copyright infringement, which is a problem, even though it's not theft? Or do you think that there are other ways that we can help mitigate copyright infringement? What ways do you think those are? And if you don't, and you think network neutrality is the vehicle, what kind of rules would all of you like to see?
Can I just say really basically, first and foremost, that the FCC has proposed rules in place for network neutrality. Those rules that would preserve the open internet apply only to lawful content, applications, and services. The key word is lawful. Also, within that same rulemaking, or notice of proposed rulemaking, there's a second clause that says reasonable network management, i.e., because the secret is the internet to some degree is already managed because certain types of traffic actually have to move a little bit faster than others to have a seamless, like VoIP, for example. Now, the FCC went even further in their proposed rulemaking, and they created a clause that said reasonable network management can apply to combating unlawful exchange of copyrighted material online. So, to me, you already actually have all you need at the FCC's side to allow for whatever other types of mechanisms you want to explore to curb, prevent, or whatever for piracy. Now, the question is whether those things will interrupt lawful, legitimate traffic, lawful, legitimate uses, or slow down the network in some way that's unacceptable to a vast majority of users. So that's the real question. I think we could have another panel discussion about how you build a system that can employ and deploy technology that can give reasonable assurances that what is being transmitted, that is copyrighted material, can be stopped or whatever if it's being used illegally. Now, if somebody could magically make that happen right now, I think everybody on this panel would say, yeah, go for it, make it work, make it go. But there are so many issues in terms of piracy, how far it looks into the packets, whether or not it includes everybody, like the indie labels, or the independent, or me, or you as an independent artist. And then we have to think about international treaty obligations where we can't make this a law to have a copyright database because we signed agreements a while ago on the international level that said we couldn't have a compulsory copyright database, meaning the government couldn't say, here it is, you have to, in order to have a copyright, you have to affirmatively register. There's a lot of conversations around this right now that are happening in a lot of different sectors, both internationally, in industry, in private and public interest, and we don't have the answers yet, but I think to her question, what we can do is apply net neutrality only to the parts of that govern your access to the platform and your ability to compete on that platform and your ability to reach your intended audience without any interference.
Whew. Can I say something? Okay, that was wonderful, by the way. Could you repeat that back?
That's what they pay me for. I'll do it in Latin.
In big Latin.
I think one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle, and look how we're all stumbling over what is net neutrality, what is copyright infringement, what is piracy. We've parsed it in a million different ways, but the missing piece of the element is we have not educated the public as to what this issue is. And therefore, everything that occurs in the internet is a victimless crime. You don't see, you talked about the humanity and the musician, you don't see these musicians starving out there trying to figure out how to feed their families. It looks like
just giving up, just quitting.
Just quitting, leaving. And so, one thing we need to do is come up with a simple definition of what is right, what is wrong, forget all these complicated formulas, so we can count on, most people are law-abiding citizens. There's always going to be a fringe element that's going to try to get away with it. But if we can appeal to their sense of morality, decency, and here is the internet, and here's how you should behave, just as if you're walking into a bookstore, you would not walk out with a book, just as you go on the website, you would not pull out an MP3 and decide it's yours. Then we all of a sudden have the givers, which we are, and the takers speaking the same language. But right now there's a complete disconnect. And unless we bring them closer together, we're going to be, parsing this a million ways and just talking to ourselves all the time.
Do you guys feel like you understand it a little bit better in general? We win, guys. We win. Right, we're out of here. Our job is done. We're going to go put on our superhero costumes and fight from the front. Thanks, everybody, for coming.